Welcome to the hardest decision of this series. I mentioned in the last video that as you make more picks, the decisions get easier and harder at the same time. I forgot to mention that they get harder because you have fewer available slots to put the minions into, and the power 4s were definitely the hardest picks. You might think this would be the king minion, given that you can only have one pick and dozens of king minions to choose from. However, king minions are generally the icing on the cake, or the glue for the faction's strategy. This means that generally, unless you're doing that faction's thing, they aren't really overly helpful. But anyway, I won't spoil the king minion video. The power 4s in Smash Up, however, aren't always as closely wedded to their faction's core strategy. There's an enormously diverse range of really strong abilities that are available. Just starting with the All-Star Power 4 minions, it will come as no surprise to anyone to hear that my admiration for the All-Stars has not stopped at the Power 4s. If you ever wanted a visual representation of support minions, then this is it. The Gelf offers great flexibility to any partner to get one of their minions in play, particularly strong if your king minion is Power 4 or if you're playing the Vigilantes for example. The Granny offers deck manipulation every turn, which is useful for any faction because if the card is one you don't want at the top of the deck, then you just simply put it to the bottom. But you'd also be surprised just how many factions have at least one card that involves the top or bottom of the deck in some way. So Granny offers some minor consistency to those factions and those specific cards. However, both of these cards are support based and there is a lot of scope for improvement here. Just as a reminder, I've already picked minions from the Zombies, Astronites, Pirates, Killer Plants, Aliens, Russian Fairy Tales and Mythic Greeks. Well, the Killer Plants and the Aliens don't have a Power 4 minion, and the Russian Fairy Tales they effectively don't have one, given that I can only pick one minion. Of the rest, these are the only Power 4s that I might consider, and even then they aren't great. Gravedigger, it's nice to put a minion from your discard pile back into your hand, but considering how broken Power 4s can get, that's only really a fair ability. The Scoundrel is interesting, providing lots of flexibility and multi-minion movement every turn, but again, how game-breaking is that? Anyway, it's irrelevant because I can't pick either of them, but I just wanted to show you what we can't pick so that you can see whether it really was such a big loss. I mentioned at the beginning that the Power 4s generally have a wide range of diverse abilities, and they aren't as susceptible as the king minions to being so intrinsically tied to their faction. However, there are some that are very good within their faction, but they lose a lot of power if they're plucked out of their faction. Take the Wayfinder for example, one of the strongest Power 4 minions in the game because of the faction it's in. Put it into my All-Star faction and it really isn't very good. And there are also some Power 4s that are just fair. I looked at every Power 4 in the game and I drew up a shortlist. There are going to be lots of them you won't see in this video, and I just wanted to use this slide to highlight why you won't see them here. All of the minions that you're seeing now are my shortlist, and what a shortlist it is. 21 minions in total, and where do you even begin with something like this? It is an incredibly daunting task. I'm going to attempt to take you through how I approached it. There were some easy removals, but it did get tough very quickly. And if you missed any of the minions as they were zipping through, I'm going to be looking at every single one of them in more detail in the coming slides. Let's start with the automatic removals, and you might be thinking, but Mark, Will Wheaton and Felicia Day are two of the strongest minions in the game, and you're absolutely right, so not to use either of them is very painful. However, what you don't know is that for each of these factions on the slide, I am using an action from their faction, so I'm not allowed to pick them. You might be wondering which action for the Geeks could possibly be better than these minions. Spoilers, it's not better, but I knew I did want an action that did this particular effect. And the Geeks were the only faction to offer the card that either wasn't too conditional or that I could actually pick. So it hurts me to say, but these are all out. But where next? Well, there are still some easy removals for me before the difficulty really does start to ramp up. Apart from the automatic removals, these are the easy ones. Mechanic is great, but if you've not got at least 4 play-on-base actions, something around that number or higher, then it really isn't worth it. It's also not worth having a minion that doesn't derive much value within their own faction, and is actually a better minion for the partner faction. Classic Rocker is good, but I really don't need any more card draw, and there are way better abilities on Power 4 minions than this. Shift is also very solid, and you could potentially get back the Invader, the First Mate, the King Minion very easily. However, I'm choosing an action that does something very similar but with a more versatile effect, and it's easier to hold onto an action play for the best time to use it than it is to hold onto a Power 4 minion. You could play Shift turn 1 for instance, but you would waste half the value of the card. Foxy Green, again, it is very solid, but it just has too much of an overlap with the Spartan from the Power 3s. You just leave it on a base and let it grow. It can also be worse than the Spartan in some circumstances and better in others. Worse because it's out of your control, and better because it can trigger more than once before it comes back around to you on your turn, and because it can really mess up your opponent's turns as they keep inadvertently changing the power on the base. Anyway, the easy ones, they're all out. Now the choices are starting to get a little bit trickier. Gelf is a versatile support minion that can give almost any faction added consistency to find a key minion. However, I mentioned in the last video that I didn't want to choose too many repeat picks from the All-Stars, and apart from the Sprout I've managed to do that so far. Compared to other power 4 minions though, it really isn't that strong. Mounty Major is a very solid power 7, 8 or 9 minion usually. If you're second by that sort of power difference, Mounty Major can often make up the gap and change the outcome in your favour. It's effectively like putting a King Rex into your faction. Is that good? Yeah, it's pretty good. I wouldn't say no to a King Rex in the faction. Is it game breaking? Maybe a little bit, but I'm not really happy with just a little bit. I'm after unlimited power levels of unfairness. The Loop Guru should really swap places with Foxy Green, but if you've said no to the Mounty Major then you can't really say yes to Loop Guru. It is far less impactful the turn you play it, and ultimately, although it's not reliant on anything else, it's almost always going to be worth less than the Mounty Major. This is definitely towards the bottom of the shortlist. Bushi, now, if you were building your faction with a greater emphasis on power counters, this would be a sure thing, and I absolutely love cheating out extra VP independently of bases. Sadly though, although I am playing actions that provide power counters, I'm not convinced that the number of actions I'm playing would make this consistent enough. So this is a very sad pass for me. Now it's getting really tricky, but there's definitely one theme in the remaining minions that we can pick out, and that's removal effects. The Lady Whirlwind is a very good removal card. It's effectively a power 5 destroy a power 3 minion. Sadly however, I don't have any way of moving the power counter from the Lady Whirlwind, so it will only be a one-time effect, and not a repeatable talent in my faction, so unfortunately it doesn't deliver the sustained value that I'm looking for. Great White really is great. It's a mobile 4-drop that you can always move alongside a regular minion play for a power spike turn. Not only that, but you can pick up some very easy destruction effects, as most factions have power 2 minions, and unless there's protection available you can't play them anywhere on any base without them being at risk. But again, it just doesn't feel broken enough to me to warrant a spot. My faction isn't really majoring on destruction, and while you want a general spread of abilities to be sufficiently versatile, being able to take out some power 2 minions doesn't really feel swingy enough to warrant a spot. Now we're getting into the really heavy hitters. Kappa Roha doesn't have that big on-play effect, but boy is it a scary minion. The ability to destroy up to 3 minions before a brace breaks is massive. In addition, it's printed power 3 or less, so if you have a Microbat Alpha with 10 power counters on it, that wouldn't be safe. Most often this card at worst will be a 7 power swing in your favour, and this is definitely going to make my super shortlist. Dusty Henry, what an effect that is. Quite a few cards provide protection from destruction. There are far fewer cards that provide protection from this sort of effect. If there's a first mate in play with Uber Serum and 10 power counters, you can just Dusty Henry it away and all the threat is gone. It's an unbelievably strong effect, and again, this one will have to make my super shortlist. So we've managed to cross out quite a few now, let's take a look at the ones we haven't yet considered. Brojack is a very strong card. It's flexible enough to work with yours or your opponent's minions, and if I were using other movement minions in my faction then it would be a strong contender. As it stands though, it's just too conditional on what your opponent is playing to get maximum value out of the effect, so Brojack's gone. Command Penguin, for a free minion play, it is very strong. Depending on what size your deck is, you may be able to play Command Penguin to play into the Frog Prince for instance, and then play another minion, and get a free minion play from your discard pile using the Frog Prince's effect. As it stands though, I'm not really playing enough cards that interact with the deck to offer much certainty out of this card. While the minions I'm playing are way above the average power level, I'd still feel awful using one of my power 4 slots on a minion that is as likely to grab the Sprout as it is the King minion. It's just too random for me. I'm generally in favour of reducing variance as much as possible rather than increasing variance. The Archmage, well, you may have realised by now that I'm a magnet for value over time, and it doesn't get much better than the Archmage. Doubling your number of action plays when you can choose any 10 actions in the game is absolutely crazy. There's also some minor synergy with the mana spot helping you occasionally draw into more actions to ensure that you always have plenty in hand to keep on abusing this effect. The Archmage is definitely in for me. Killer Queen, wow, from one ridiculous power 4 minion to another. The Killer Queen provides some absolutely immense value, and cards like the First Mate can come straight into play as a power 3 minion at the Killer Queen's base. I'm going to keep this as a maybe for now. Stoneford, you might be thinking that this is very weak compared to the rest of the minions on the slide. Be careful though, Stoneford is deceptively strong. When you can play any 10 actions in the game, the ability to search for the exact action you need for that situation is incredibly strong, and this is another one for the maybe pile. So with all the minions reviewed so far, I've managed to pick one, discard 16, and maybe the other 4, so let's go back and look at the maybes. So wow, how do you pick out of these? This was literally what I was doing. I picked one and then the next day I'd just choose another, but I do have to decide, so let's do this. Killer Queen is great, but it's best paired with movement. You play a minion at the Killer Queen's base, use the talent, move the minion away, and repeat. I'm not able to do that in the faction, so really I'm only likely to get 1 or 2 uses out of the talent before the base breaks, because the power really increases so fast on the Killer Queen's base. It is great, but my faction just really isn't geared up for her. If you're going down the power counter route, I'd definitely go with the Killer Queen and the Bushi as my 2 power 4 minions. Dusty Henry, what an effect, but when do you play it? Like some of the others we've seen, this is a card you might hold on to and play it later in the game for greater effect. If you open the game with Dusty Henry and 4 actions, you're definitely feeling sad. As good as it is, it has a window of value that you might never realise you're actually in until that window's passed. So for being too conditional, I have to cut it. Stoneford and Kappa Roja are all that's left. Kappa Roja is delayed value versus Stoneford's immediate value. When I was designing this faction, the golden thread for me was do your thing as well as you possibly can, then start to think about what the other players are doing. So ultimately, I went for Stoneford. To put the right action into your hand for that situation is absolutely incredible, and it does combo so well with the Archmage as well as the other power 4 minion. I'm sure the Archmage will come as no surprise, and I'm guessing many of you picked him. Stoneford, however, will be a surprise. I'm actually a little bit surprised myself, but I've explained how I got there. The effect isn't flashy, it's not even value over time, it's just very, very deceptively strong. So let's finish with a final comparison between my All-Star Power 4s and the actual All-Stars. I've lost the versatility of support that the All-Stars provide, but really there's no competition here. The Archmage should have been a power 5 minion and provides ridiculous value. Stoneford gives you the exact card you need in that situation. That in itself could be game winning. So what do you make of my picks? What would your power 4 picks have been? Let me know down in the comments below, and with that being said, I will see you all next time. Goodbye.